Hello, everybody, and welcome to the music rating, ranking, and reviewing podcast we like to call Music Meltdown, in which we rate, rank, and review any artist's discographies, songs, really whatever musical topic comes to mind. This episode going to be tackling a interesting artist, different from everybody else that I've covered, and probably anybody that I will cover. The 10 core studio records of Icelandic singer-songwriter Bjork. This is a unique discography, to put it lightly.
Yeah.
Very one to her own, but incorporating many different styles and unique atmosphere. My familiarity with Bjork is down in the dirt. I had heard debut once, and that was really it before starting this. Um, Music channel Tastes Like Music was going to cover her, so I was starting the deep dive, and as well the deep discog dive that Mike the Snare put out came out this year. That really inspired me to dig further into Bjork than I had before. At this point I've heard pretty much every record twice except for Utopia and Fesora. And I will leave my opinions quiet for now, as this was a very interesting experience for me. So I have noticed, however, I am not alone. I have Dylan above me, the Scraws,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call him,
Yeah.
and your familiarity with Bjork going into this.
I can echo all that you just said, except I haven't heard anything until actually very recently. I'd say back in October, I decided, hey, I've known about this artist. She's really big in the 90s. She has really highly rated albums on like Rate Your Music and Album of the Year and all those websites that coagulate all people's opinions on different artists and bands. And yeah, as you can see, I'm already become a big fan just on the spring of all of those listens I did all the way back in October and all the way up till now. I mean, talk about a diverse and unlike any other pop singer I've actually heard. I'd say she's up there for me in terms of vocalists, pop music, experimentation, innovation, all that encapsulated uh critical acclaim that she always gets. And yeah, as you can see, I've become a really big fan of her already. And uh apart from like all the well-known period that she's put out, like all the critical acclaim from that, I even think she even goes a step further beyond that. But we'll probably get into those albums here shortly. But yeah, she's a big artist for me.
Absolutely, that's great to
Yeah.
hear. I'm going to get schooled more than likely because this may have
Mhm.
not gone so hot. Do you want me to kick this off with a ranking, or would you like to start?
I'll kick off my number 10 here.
Gotcha.
And first off, we're gonna do some preambles. So at my number 10, I have Utopia. Yeah, I mean I got it on CD. Um, and this is her album in 2017, and it just comes off the bat of one of the most tumultuous times in her career with her breakup album like 2 years prior. And I'd say the it only came 2 years after Volunteer, which was the one before, and that only happened one other time, which was in the beginning of her career. And she usually has like 3 to 4 album or 4 year lengths between albums, but she wanted to have a, let's say, like a sister album in terms of the narrative. So you have the breakup side, and then you have the growth and the expansion of that narrative coming out of a relationship and growing from it. And I'd say like for an album this intricate and um mostly it's all produced by the same producer, Arca, which has she hasn't worked with any producer that long since the 90s, obviously. And I'm in terms of the sound in here, it definitely shows in the arrangements. And sure, they can be overblown at times, especially near the middle. And this is her longest album by a long shot. It's like 76 minutes in length, but I'd say it definitely holds up in terms of the atmosphere and the sound she puts on this thing. It's definitely really glitchy near the middle, but it starts off really great with A Rise in My Senses, which is, I think, one of her better openers. And for an artist that has a lot of really good albums, in my opinion, this late into her career, she definitely shows off a lot of what she was building up to in terms of production and songwriting. But there are some weaker moments, like I'd say Paradisia and Claimstaker, or the title track, which I don't really go back to all that much in terms of like lyrically. Just sonically, they're okay for me, like nice spots on the album. And lyrically, it's not, it really has a commentary on self appreciation and healing from your relationships and having a better grasp on your femininity. And like, this is their most pretty album so far. Uh, I'd say like, yeah, in terms of like the 2010s and 2010s ones. So, I mean, like tracks like Blissing Me and Saint and Tabula Rosa, like I can listen to those all day with the flute arrangements. And yeah, I can talk about this some more, but to well, my gripe with it, the production definitely overtakes some of the songs. Like I don't need to hear like flutes muddied up in the mix with a lot of electronics and a lot of long-winded songs there here and there. But overall, I still give it like a 7 out of 10, like 3.5 stars. My least favorite songs are definitely the ones near the middle, but it's a book ended with like two, four amazing tracks. Like, yeah, sure.
Okay, interesting. Well, we agree at the bottom. I have Utopia, but you like this way more than me. And I want to say, my ratings and my reviews get incredibly positive past this point. I really enjoy doing Bjork. This record is not very good. I think it's far too bloated for its own good, being 70 plus minutes, by far her longest. It just doesn't really occupy the space very well. There's a fair chunk of material that just ends up blending together, and it's a full listening experience. I struggle to really be drawn into the sound across here. On all of her records, they definitely lend a lot from mood, from atmosphere, from just general aesthetic. And I feel like the aesthetic of this record just simply isn't that alluring to me. I think that my main issue just boils down to, at the core of it, though, just a lack of very memorable songs. Arise in My Senses is pretty cool, and I did really enjoy Body, Memory, and Loss, but everything else to me is just rather dull and, weirdly for Björk, a bit uninteresting. I ended up at a high 2.5 stars. It's pretty mediocre overall, just like a 5 out of 10. However, I much prefer everything that comes after this record on my list, as I did really enjoy Beer. Just didn't much care for Utopia, which is a shame because I've heard some Arca stuff, and I think that Arca is a cool artist in and of herself. Just don't think that her collaborations with Björk were the best. So, Utopia, 2.5 stars, number 10.
All right. So we're going to number 9, and I'm sticking with 3.5 stars still for an album that came out 10 years before, which is Volta. Now, in terms of like popularity, it's actually in term like the past few years, I've seen a lot of people praise it for like some of the specific key tracks like um Earth Intruders and Wanderlust and Dull Flame of Desire, I see a lot of people praise that nowadays. I don't know about back in the day, because I didn't hear this obviously when it first came out, but I'm gonna have a little backstory on this. So this is mainly in a lot of the songwriting was inspired by her living and working on a cruise ship for a couple of years, working on like that Drawing Restraint movie she did with her partner, which is we don't want to talk about that. So, but the sonic elements of this album I think are really could have like been a long ways away. Like that later down the line, I could hear a lot of people taking this sound in the 2010s with this tribal instrumentation and the horns coming in, but has a lot of string instruments all over the album. It's just sonically really all over the place, but really interesting to me. And I especially like the sound of the first track, which is Earth Intruders. It jumps right into the tribal sounds and like I'd say vocally, this is one of her most interesting. It's like she doesn't sing a lot. She just sort of has a lot of vocal motifs and acts and her tracks, but she surely makes up for it with the melodies. Like melodically, I can see this being one of her best, but some of the urgency on the tracks don't always hit, but some of them I absolutely love. Like the urgency on Wanderlust with the instrumentation and the horns backing it is one of my favorite Bjork songs. It's like a chaotic sample beat with horns, like it's so unique, and it's one of the first like the vocal debut appears here, like with Dull Flame of Desire. Like that's one of her. That's the debut of her first duet, which is sort of it was different for her, but she brought in a well-known artist that she loved at the time, and she the execution isn't always the the highlight for me on here, but it actually I've grown to really like that song. And for me it kind of drowns out near the middle. I don't really go back to I See Who You Are or Pneumonia all that much, but lyrically, if you look at the lyrics on some of these songs, this is a by far most political statement. Like she has a lot of um deep rooted lyrics and stuff she really cared about at the time, being a mother. And if you really go back and look at the lyrics and really dissect those topics, they usually come off a bit jarring at first, but they really fit with like the kind of sound she's going for. But in my opinion, it's not really her most focused effort. I mean, the brass arrangements were sort of shock when it first came out, and the lyrics weren't really fitting to that style. I feel like she could have done a lot more with the sort of first two songs, and the problem with me is the songs are struggling to be of any structure or like realized at some points, but I still really come back to this album for the melodies and having maybe too many ideas at once, but I say later down the line I can see this going up my list, but for now I'm sticking at number 9 with 7.5 or 3.5 stars.
Nice.
Yeah.
That is also my number 9. I have Volta. Definitely her weakest up to that point, but there's plenty of very interesting qualities about Volta that make it worthwhile. Aside from Medulla, how you pronounce that, I feel like it's her most varied record up to this point, getting hints of all of the first 4 records across it, which after her most experimental work, being Medulla, definitely was a much needed cool down, I would say. The first 3 songs on here almost remind me of a bit of post and homogenic were sort of put into a blender. It's really interesting and pretty great in my opinion. I thought Innocence was just all right, however, but I think the back half as a whole is very strong. Vertebrae by Vertebrae is great. Hope was my favorite song across the record, and the closer, My Juvenile, is pretty stunning. Despite that, I do think that there are a couple of holes, just a couple of missteps across the album. I don't always think that the more pop production style tended to benefit the songs, which I think is something that can be said about all of her previous works, where all of her productions were generally speaking very strong across the early parts of her career, being able to incorporate elements of like trip hop pop and slight pop elements to it. And I think that they all sound really excellent. I found this one to maybe be a bit more dated in comparison to the rest of her works. Despite that, though, I'm still at 4 stars, like an 8 out of 10. It's a very strong record. I think a lot of these are very strong. However, I just don't think that this one has the highs of highs or is as unique as some of her later works. So, number 9, Full Time.
Fosora is my number 8. It's her newest record, her what she claims to be her Icelandic culmination of her career. And this did come out in 2022, and you can probably see why she states it that way since she was in lockdown with her family in Iceland and a lot of musicians around that time in her bubble. And but to me, I think she started really working on this like back in 2019 with a lot of some of the elements on here. Um, but it has a lot of elements about togetherness and growth and family, and she incorporates all this Icelandic instrumentation that she had parts of in, I'd say, like Volunteer with the strings. She and the flutes. She brings back some of this on here, but the mainstay is the clarinets. Like the clarinets on this album are really good, and some of the sounds from Casimine, um, the Gabba instrumentalist, playing as the producer here that has a lot of the backing beats. Um, for me, they definitely hit well and in some of the, and maybe most of the tracks actually. But apart from like Medulla, this features more prominently her vocal talents. Like some of his interludes on here, she does a lot of editing and manipulating with her vocals in some points, and her voice got really deep since like Utopia first came out. Like this is the longest stretch from like maybe any album in her career is like 5 years after, which I think based on her vocals going down, this really is the sort of um what do you want to say? It's like the sort of instrumentations you want backing this kind of vocals, like the clarinets, but the album as has only her on producing. If you like look it up, she's the only one producing this, but she has a lot of help with the arrangements and all of that sort of stuff. And this leads off the album leads off really well with like Atopus and Ovule, which I enjoy as more together as joint tracks because they have like a yin and yang sort of quality to them in terms of the lyrics, like Atopus being about conflict and Ovule being more about the meditation and importance of being together and connecting, sort of how mushrooms do. Like this whole album is like has so many thematic elements behind it if you look past the instrumentation, but I can see some people not liking it as much with her vocals not being as they used to be, or some of the slower, longer tracks. I think, well, I appreciate them more than most do, or and some of the well, I think where this album really shines is the guest spots on here, like Serpent with Feet and she actually brings out her two children to do well some of my favorite songs on there with Ancestress and Her Mother's House closing off the record. It's just beautiful, like the vocals and the elements brought on the songs is just other. It's just unlike what she's done before, like in terms of like the soft and breathy additions with the clarinets mixing together with the melodies. It's really good, and what it's what puts this album a lot higher than what most people put it on their lists. But it is one of her most focused and topical records lyrically. But in terms of the sonics, I can see it being a lot slower. Not really something people can get into at first listen, but it makes me really interested in what she's gonna have next. So yeah, that's all I have to say. I think I have it at like I'd say I still have it in 3.5 stars, but it's a high 7.5 out of 10 or 3.5.
Thanks. I am going to be talking about that record a fair bit later, so that's interesting. Next up for me, I have the record by Ophelia from 2010. I think it's pretty close between this and Volta, but I ended up placing this one ahead a bit higher. I really love the variety that's found on here. It has some of her most experimental moments and electronic moments, I would say. Very sparse and gentle at points, while also just adding a ton. It's just a weird record. I like the use of things like wind chimes and more natural sounding instrumentation across the album. My favorites would be Moon, Cosmogony, Virus, Sacrifice, and then my absolute favorite here was Mutual Core. The last few songs on here almost remind me a lot of what PC music or hyperpop would later end up doing in the decade. On the whole, though, I think it's a very interesting listen, a very good album. It's another 4 stars. I think it's another really good album, although I wouldn't quite say it's top shelf, and I get why somebody might not be as into this later period, but I found it very interesting and very rewarding to listen to those records. So, number 8, Biophilia.
All right. Okay. So this is the point in my list where it's been really hard. Like these next four, I think they can go either way. My number seven could be my number three or four at some points. That's how hard this was. But I'm jumping the 4 stars and going with debut at my number seven. And this was her big, like big selling classic debut, like outside of the 70s albums and her work with the Sugar Cube. She's always been in the music scene for that long since like the late 70s, and she's been in a lot of Icelandic punk bands. But this is her actual debut album, in my opinion. And it's her biggest selling too. It just coming off of her hit band with the Sugar Cubes. They had an album just a year prior to this one releasing, and what's come of this is she's journeyed to London to discover her new musical experiences and the culture outside of Iceland, and noticing newfound interest in like dance clubs and the culture around that time with house music. And she definitely encapsulates the energetically and unique styles based on the dance music around that time. And she unveils to the world her eccentricities with melodies and her vocals and her influences. Like most of these songs she's been writing since she was a little kid. And now that she's has a chance to actually portray them in her own style that she's been influenced by, it's magic, honestly. And for the 90s, I'm sure this release was pretty much as unique as you can get for the early 90s around that time, especially for pop music and dance music and electronic. But with such tracks like Venus as a Boy and songs like One Day that just blend pop so well with dance and sounds perfectly in tune with the pop side as well, and making it her own all at the same time. And it's just I don't think the the talent like that was as high as anybody at that point. But I may be a little ignorant there in terms of like my placement, but I can honestly say that the first time I heard it, I wasn't as into it. Like I wouldn't put it that I really loved it at first, but it this was the album that grew on me, honestly. It Once I heard Crying Again and songs like Anchor Song, Fully, and songs like One Day, which is I think one of my favorites, maybe my favorite on this album. It just clicked with me one day that I really loved it. And in terms of like the hits on here, they're a little overplayed for me. So songs like Big Time Sensuality or like Violently Happy, I don't go back to it as much. So that's probably why I place it this low. But honestly, just about all songs in here are fitting to dance to. Like, th- I could say like this is her most introverted, but it doesn't feel that way when you listen to the dance beats. But the way her vocals are, it's like she's more subdued than any of her albums before or any of her like music afterwards as well. So as I said, I would give it an 8 out of 10 and 4.5 4 stars for like being such a breakthrough at the time as well.
Uh, I would agree with most of what you had to say. However, I think having it at number seven is a little wacky, but we'll get to that in due time. I also have a choice that I know that some people are very, very high on, and I really enjoy it as well, but I don't think it's quite one of her best. I'm going with Volnicura. I think it's a very strong late period record from Bjork. It reminded me a lot of Homogenic and Debut. It feels a lot more somber, a bit more gentle compared to something like Volta. As well, on a song for song level, I do feel it's a step above Biophilia. Stone Milker is a really great opener. I think Family is excellent. Adam Dance is really fun, and I think it closes great with quick. It closes greatly with Quicksand. This record ended up utilizing the track's runtimes very well. I feel like a lot of the songs on here felt a bit more extended and were just sort of longer than your typical Bjork song. I think that it blended to a really interesting style. I believe something like Family was around 8 or 10 minutes, which is a little long for her, but it keeps your interest through most of it. So I don't have an issue with it. To me, this is pretty close to her classic era overall. It's not quite on the same level, but I do think that it's one of the best of her newer crop of work. I have it at a pretty high four. It's a very fun, very good album, Volnicura.
Okay. Next up, I have Biophilia. This is my number 6. And of all the Bjork albums, this was maybe the one I would not actually say someone to dive into like the first one because I mean it just starts off really out there, but also a little bit different because with this like sort of thing she's going with the concept, you can kind of tell why she's doing it this way, especially with the extracurriculars behind this album. Like she wants to make every single song into an app on another app that's inside of the App Store that teaches people that music is connected to nature. And if that's the concept behind your album late in this career, I don't think people are gonna really uh come into it that excited unless you're like a big fan of hers, which I can kind of see where people were going from. What let's just talk about um the sound behind this because her vocals definitely sound a little bit different from the last album, which was Volta, and that's probably because she had a little vocal surgery to her vocal throat because she had like um I don't know what it was, but it made after the surgery, her vocals had a lot deeper register, and you can definitely see that on the songs here. And it's allowing her to sing in like a lot lower of a register from before and eventful. it's eventful for the time because it has a lot of environmental elements and protests in Iceland that she was doing around this time or before the release. Definitely influenced most of the songs on here. But the basis behind this album is the relationship between musicology and nature. Like the tracks like Moon had like moon phases in mind of certain elements of the strings in that song. And even in Thunderbolt, you had like a singing Tesla coil as the bass notes in that song, or even tracks like Hollow that sing about DNA, and it's like so experimental that it's like strings that are coming at you. It's like if you picture yourself in that song, it feels like you're at the DNA scale. Like there's DNA all around you, or like in a track like Mutual Core, like all the heavy synth sounds and bass drums in that track makes you feel like the earth there's an earthquake around you or something like that. And all that is good, but the song quality to me is just so much more interesting and intricate and than albums that I had a lot lower on my lists. But I can see the reputation of this being bogged down just outside of like she had more of the extracurriculars in line with the app and all that stuff aside from like the songs actually. And I can kind of see where people are coming from with that. Some of the song structures aren't really that fleshed out, but the idea is there absolutely, and it's so creative. Like I come to this album just for like songs like Moon and Cosmogony and even Sacrifice or Virus. Virus probably being my favorite off of here. And I don't know if I have like a least favorite track or I don't have a track that I dislike, I should say. But I don't really go back to songs like um Solstice all that much, but I can appreciate it for what it is. Absolutely. And no track is misplaced on here at all. Like the flow of this album is actually I think is pretty good, maybe a lot better than albums like Volta or album or maybe Medulla, I would say. But the ambitions are there, but for its own good, the experimentation is just shy of genius for me. That's why I have it 8 out of 10 or 4 stars.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I really enjoyed that one. I just think it's not quite one of her best, like, overall sets of material, which is kind of what knocks it down a bit, but it's kind of grasping at straws for most of these. Now, my favorite of her more recent efforts, maybe a bit surprising, I have Vasora. To me, this is really her shining achievement outside of the classic era of records. As you couldn't tell, my top five is the first five, as it should be. But anyways, I think Bjork is able to take everything that she was trying on Utopia and really rein it in, kind of make something good out of it. This is a really chaotic, almost aggressive record at points, but it's very gorgeous in and of itself. I think that her voice surprisingly sounds excellent here, despite, as you mentioned before, her surgery and with just general age. I think that she sounds in top form still. And on the bass level, I just think that this is her best batch of songs in a while. Etapos is a great opener. Of Viol is very good. Ancestress might be her best song since Medulla for me. And I think the 1-2 punch of Free Fall and Fesora that ends the record are just great. I just found myself really enjoying my time with it. I've only heard it one time, and this is probably one I will re-listen to sooner rather than later, and hence why I only have it 4 stars. But it's a very high 4-star album. Really found myself enjoying Fesora a good bit, and it would probably slide into my top 25 of last year. Really enjoyed it a lot. So number 6, Fesora.
All right. Now, number 5 for me is Medulla from 2004. And I mean, honestly, coming off of that string of albums in the 90s and early 2000s, it just This is about mid 2000s, but around the time she was doing this was her biggest experimental, like bare bones album conceptually and lyrically, being a new mother, coming off of albums like Vespertine and Homogenic, which she really took the grasp of music by like all accounts. She experimented her butt off of those, and this is like fully experimental, like off the deep end, with this being purely a cappella, an album hinting in the world of Icelandic folk at points with some of the tracks. Or I sometimes listen to this and think of like goth elements, like with how the vocals are arranged and some of the creepy beats with like some of the acapella moments on here. Like sounds really gothic sometimes, especially with the interludes around the tracks. And at spots in the album, it can be as catchy as debut, but so many eccentricities and freelanced at the same time. But something she always wanted to make as a child was this kind of album, honestly, is something as creative and intricate as a vocal album that's beautiful and enchanting as this, with some of my favorite songs like Desired Constellations, which has a little bit of electronic beat into it, but that build up in the chorus is just amazing. And on on terms of vocal samples in this album, she does a really knock up job with a lot of the beats, in my opinion, with songs like Who Is It, or even like Submarine, as experimental as that. Like I can get behind that sort of fun in like the studio and using your vocals to make that sort of track, or even the moments in Oceana where it sounds like sirens coming up uh out of the ocean, like doing this vocal uh motif where it's like they're screaming, and it's like really catchy and really off-putting at first, but I love it now. um a lot of the sounds on here definitely harken back to some of the vocal work she was doing on Vespertine and stuff like that, but this sounds a lot more crisper to me. Like outside of the first four, this one sounds like a lot more produced and the vocals are a lot more crisp, which is probably what she was going for, honestly. And I have it at number five, but outside of like some of the interludes, I don't go back to as much. This is like more of a full album experience to me, with some songs I can pick off here and there, but it is really crisp sounding and haunting at points. And that's to the album's benefit, in my opinion. And for me, it took so long to actually really appreciate it, but it gets better every time. I could see this even being higher on my list. So, yeah, it's like number five, 8 out of 10, or 4 stars.
Okay. Yeah, that was higher on mine. This is when I start making enemies, my friend. Alrighty. This is the record of hers. Mind you, I'm at 4.5 star territory. I think that all of these top five are genuinely great albums. However, I don't get this one to a certain degree. I still think it's great, mind you, but I don't get how people think it's her best, let alone how three people on a certain music channel could think it's her best. I'm going with Homogenic at number five. Here's the deal. I think that the placement below the records that I have it isn't a knock to this record. I love the sparser style on here mixed in with the heavier electronic moments, almost industrial tinged at points. The soundscapes across this record are very immaculately crafted. Her vocals, in many degrees, have reached an apex on this record. For me, however, I just don't think it has the punch, and I don't think it has quite the intimacy that you can find on debut, nor the variety and the showmanship that's on post. And it has the only song on the first three records that I actively dislike, being Pluto, which is weird because I kind of like those more heavier experimental electronic songs. Like I love hyperpop and PC music and stuff, so I should like Pluto. I just think it sucks though. But past that massive speed bump, I think it's a pretty amazing record. Um, it continues her amazing streak of closers with All Is Full of Love. The only thing that really holds this record back for me is Pluto. If any other song replaced it, I could maybe see five potential. I still think it's a great record, and I think it's just a testament to how excellent of an artist Bjork really is that it falls this low. It's just the only one of the top five records for me that has a song that I actively dislike. So number five, Homogenic, 4.5 stars. It's great. I love it.
Hmm. Okay. I'm still sticking with 4 stars, but this is a high. It can go like 4.5 maybe. Mm, hmm. I'm going with Volnikira as my number four. And this is the antithesis of anguish and love for Björk at this time in her career. And so it's on full display that she absolutely is heartbroken on here. Granted, what came like let's say 14 years before is definitely the opposite of what is on this album. And essentially, it's her breakup record, and it's picturing the incoming demise and all the aftermath surrounding this relationship she had. But the subject matter portion, this person she was with was cynical and selfish in a lot of these songs. And to me, I don't really relate to that as much, but you can't deny like she's pouring her heart out on this thing. Like I don't know how anybody can not listen to songs like Black Lake or Family or even songs like History It Touches and not feel the emotion behind any of those vocals. Like she rarely belts out a pop song on here, which to me is was really ambitious for her. Like a lot of people knew her for the time as being um, a pop star and then an innovator, an experimentalist. But on here, she like peels off that all that out to open her chest up and just so people can see the wound that was left from a breakup as emotional as and long lasting as she had. And but this album sonically, I can see it being like her most orchestral and operatic piece. Like a lot of the songs are long-winded, but they are long-winded for really good reasons. You can see them displayed on a stage or in a movie at certain points in like a visual telling of some sort. And it kicks off fantastically with Stone Milker and Lion Song and History It Touches and Black Lake. That 4 song run to me is like absolutely transcendent, and the ballads on here are really good. And she creates this atmosphere that the first half of the album is a lot of the coming on point and demise of a relationship in the song Family. If you listen to that sudden beat stop going into like the little plucking of the strings, to me that's sort of like the middle point of the album where it switches into the aftermath where you get songs like Not Get that display the how you're going to protect your loved ones from the the feeling of death, and songs like Adam Dance um that she's reflecting on sort of there's a metaphor about two halves dancing as atoms as as like the polar opposites of each other. And that song features Anotony, which was on Volta before, and I think she does a lot better in this sort of duet style than on the previous album she was on. And the middle portion of this record gets the most plotting for me, but that's really for good reason. She gets really angry and then is mournful. It's like this is a beautiful album in the shortest terms. Like, and this is when Arca steps in. I think the production is a lot better for Arca's point of view, and especially on the back half, like Not Get and sounds like Mouth Mantra is really good. It's just such a hard album to place at points because you want to listen to it, but you don't want to get sad at the same time. So, but I have it this high just it's been on my rotation for a while now, and it's worthwhile record and piece of her whole career as a whole that puts it this high for me. It's maybe her most mature out of her more recent stuff, and I admire that a lot for artists that came out of the 90s so hyperactive and had a lot of ambition in terms of sound, and then she goes to this mellow tone. It's just really good. I think it's her most artistic statement of her career outside of the 90s and early 2000s, obviously. So I'm still sticking with like a high four, maybe four and a half here with Fall the Cure at number four.
Alrighty. Yeah, that one's really good. And I totally get having it higher. It just sort of fell near the bottom because of how strong this initial run is. A record that I've heard some people aren't necessarily as high on. I really enjoy it. At number four, I have Medulla. I was a bit worried going into this album. I'd heard from many people that the first four really are a bit the cream of the crop, but this album is on par and better than Homogenic for me. So it's by far her most sparse up to this point, getting down to just beats and voice. And I think it's just amazing. I love the chaos and almost frantic nature of this record at points, despite the lack of any traditional musicality really supporting her. There's a sense of emotion found across here that I don't think that you get from any other Bjork record. She's not really that emotional of an artist, I would say. Like she has her moments, obviously, but for the most part, it's more so atmospheric. It's more so mood dependent, and she has great melody at points. Despite that, "Pleasure Is All Mine" I think is an incredible opener. Whereas "The Line" is great, and I think "Mouse Cradle" is incredibly interesting. And this album is just very interesting, and it's a really different step for her to go after, spoiler alert, her masterpiece being Vespertine. I think it's a pretty truly great album. I have it 4.5 stars, although I understand why people are less into this one. We all have our vices. It is what it is. But no, great record, Medulla, number four.
Okay, so these top three, we're getting into the top three for me. And I usually, um, I think I'm gonna do a swap for here. So I'm gonna go with at number three. I'm gonna do Post as my number three. Uh, so this is her second album, her sophomore release. This is pre-homogenic, but it's post debut, meaning the album of the same title as Post. And this is for to me her defining superstar record. Front to back, this thing flows tremendously, in my opinion. I mean, it kicks off with one of the hardest hitting 90s tracks in electronic music and pop of that decade. Then it goes right into Hyper Ballad, which is so good. Like jaw dropping how the first time I heard that track, I was mesmerized. And it just keeps going after that. It's like songs like Modern Things I Love and the crowning achievement of her covers in her career is Oh So Quiet to me, which is like the sort of play on like classic vocal jazz, but it's just all her. She doesn't shy away from her vocal talents for a bit on here. She just screeches all over the song, and I really love it. And outside of outside of the beginning, it just goes straight into songs like You've Been Flirting Again, which is so pretty, and goes right into Isabel, which is another hit off of here. It's just I just keep naming off the whole album. It's like this is flawless, basically, in terms of a track list. The shorter tracks here are like her most out there and hyperactive, like Enjoy and songs like Miss You, which is so weird with this sort of mariachi band sort of style behind it. It's like really interesting, and this is the variety of Bjork here is like I'd say in terms of everything she's done afterwards, she hints at it on this record, in my opinion. Like all the interesting experimentation or the songs or the styles she would play into a lot further in her career. But the sudden style shifts all over the album can be a bit chaotic at times. It's just something that you can come back to, and whatever song comes on, you're gonna love, no matter what's playing. And off it could this yeah, it can be a bit weary at times. Like you don't want to listen to a song like Enjoy and then go into You've Been Flirting Again and then go right into a song like Possibly Maybe, which is so gorgeous and has like this really good walking bass on it. This is just tremendous. And I would basically uh put this as it's got little bits and sounds from everything she's going to do later on, but it sounds so futuristic and high energy and innovative, influential, all that. And it's probably my favorite album cover of hers as well, just to make that note. So yeah, I can put this even higher, like maybe in my number one, maybe number two, but I'm sticking at number three, 9 out of 10 or high 4.5 stars.
Alrighty, not quite to that one yet, because I'm gonna knock out the big disagreement that you and I had with the debut by number three. Definitely a bit of a grower for me. I'd heard this album before, as I mentioned, and I thought it was all right. I thought it was good, but I didn't resonate too strongly with it. I had it 3.5. Clearly, I've grown on it, but I'm fully swapped over my opinion at this point. I heard it two more times since my first listen, and I feel pretty comfortable calling it a 4.5 star album, and it's great. Like all of my top five. It's very dark, it's very moody, despite having clear influences of club and house music. And I just love her usage of electronics and how they help just fill out the sound of everything. With Bjork's, even at this stage in her career, just beautiful and amazing vocal prowess to accompany it. A very wild and willing to go all over the place within her vocals, very similar to like a Kate Bush, like an Elizabeth Fraser. Just not really somebody that's limited by a standard song structure or just your standard vocal ranges and whatnot. She does whatever she wants, and it's great. It's awesome. But I think her writing and her actual like songcraft on this record, that's something that I feel like she's fairly underrated for. Nobody really takes into account her actual lyrical content because, as I've mentioned, it's far more based upon just sort of mood, atmosphere, just sort of everything that surrounds that. But at the core, I think that this is a really great batch of songs. My favorite one being the close of the Anchor song. But I feel like this is one of those records, and really one of all of her records, where they just need to give it time to really sink in. As there's just a ton of beauty to be found all across debut and most of our catalog. So 4.5 stars, a great album for debut.
Yeah, I can kind of get why people have that high as they do, and like I said, it can go either way for me. It can really crap up my list one day if I really get in the mood to listen to it again. But my number two is Homogenic, and the album that came right after Post. Yeah, this was difficult. The top three, all steps above the rest from before, and all time albums for me. I've switched 2 and 3 for a little bit now, and for even a good of a reason as the sudden shift in style. Like Post was all chaotic variety, and this is like one sound and a little bit of minimalism at that, but it doesn't sound like that at all. And it can be maybe my number one at points, but the album itself is maybe her most extroverted in terms of, say, the lyrics or the sound or her singing. All stops. It's majestic and like magic at points in terms of the atmosphere of the songs. Like when you go into the album, you hear the fluttering beat patterns and the vocal melodies in the background of Hunter, and then goes right into maybe your biggest song off of here, Yoga. And it's just majestic in terms of, if you put in one word, it's just majestic all the way through. And some people feel this is her iciest album, but to me, I feel like whenever I listen to it, especially the first side, I'm at like the top of the atmosphere, hovering above a mountain, watching the clouds change from clear to rainfall or even snowy. And this is playing in the background, the like Bachelorette playing in the background of me climbing a mountain and going all the way up to the atmosphere. It's just, to me, it's her one of her most consistent in sound quality and the lyrics as well, tackling a bunch of heavy tones about love and losing it or gaining hope and calling out people for um the ignorance that they have, or tracks like 5 years, she's egging people on to like learn something about what they believe in, and it's just really good to. And compared to her contemporaries at the time, she's in full innovation mode. Like without this album, a lot of albums and electronic music could not be made. And this is and this is her. A lot of people think this is her magnum opus, but I have it at number two for now, and it's mainly because I don't really get into the second half as much as I do the first, honestly. But if I want to be really controversial, I honestly go back to All Is Full of Love, the album track, more than the actual single sometimes, just sort of because of the atmosphere and like the getting lost in the sound of it. It's just really good. And yeah, I would pick out Bachelorette and that All Is Full of Love and All Neon Like or Yoga. It's just, I could run through the whole track list and be satisfied. So yeah, it's like a high 4.5 stars, 9 out of 10 for homogenic.
Nice. Glad that wouldn't have to refute that at number one. But no, I think that record's great. There's plenty to enjoy on it. I just personally connect with her other material more, so that's what it is. Number two for me, Post. For me, it's a very natural progression from the debut. It's also at 4.5 stars. Spoiler: my entire top five is 4.5. No fives for Bjork, but that's not really an issue. I think the electronic elements that she played with across the first record are a lot more pronounced here, and are a bit more naturally ingrained within the record itself. And she's spreading her wings a bit more as a vocalist. She's even more all over the place on debut. It provides a very unique style because she's just sort of going crazy, almost operatic all across the record. Despite that, I probably don't like any individual song here more than my favorites off debut, but it's just far more consistent. My favorites being Army of Me, Isabel, and possibly Maybe. But my absolute favorite is the gorgeous, amazing big band jazz number. It's So Quiet, just really excellent. And to me, it's Bjork's vocal apex in the entire catalog. Just undeniable how great she is across that. It's just another great record by her with plenty of amazing songs to accompany it. It just so happens that she released an incredibly icy and incredibly cold and incredibly serene and gorgeous record in 2001 that overtakes this one. So, do you want to start us out to discuss the greatness that is Vespertine?
Well, you make me with that post review. You make me want to switch again
Too
for T
bad.
number two.
It's too
Uh,
late.
but it's not going to be number one because Vespertine is number one, obviously, and it's unbridled magic. It's so sensual. The lyrics all over this album is immaculate. The wintry exploration of the sounds, the pittering microtonal beats, the gorgeous strings all over it, heavenly melodies, breathtaking vocals. This is an experience worth having for any artist, and not just pop, just any artist. And it's not a record you should be probably first introduced to Bjork. I'd say probably listen to her past three before this, in my opinion. And I'd say it can be a grower at times. It's not as catchy or immediate as like maybe debut or it is or post. And like homogenic, it has a lot of vigor behind it, but it's really hidden back by the emotional tone of the record. She's not really um boasting as much with her vocals as she is on Post and Homogenic, but the vocals on here are just excellent. She makes every vocal perfectly down to a T mean something behind this album. And she states it's her most domestic Wonderland sort of album. It has a lot of lyrical themes behind uh being together with your loved one and having central wild and magical moments with them and just experiencing all new things and uh, sometimes there is a there when I first started there was a dull moment or two, but I just quickly turned around to that because the more I listen to it, the more you realize every song you have a meaning behind it. And I'd say my last two often can be comforting to hear, but putting this on, it's even more comforting when you listen to it all the way through because I can barely pick a least favorite off here. I mean, honestly, I would say maybe Frosty is, but that's more of a lead in to one of my favorites off here, Aurora, with the chorus being so melodic and so catchy to me. Is like I hear that song every day in my head. It's so good. And songs like Sun in My Mouth, being as short as they are, they're just too pretty to skimp out on. Or I don't think any really, I don't think I can really connect with the lyrics as much. But in terms of like the sound, you don't have to connect with them to know this is already her masterpiece. Honestly, it's immaculate. Fit in the, it fits the context of every song. And at this point in her career, she solidified this as her royal masterpiece as art pop queen. Yeah, to say.
Alrighty. The number one, the correct number one, Vespertine. Really the obvious winner in the catalog for me, and for very good reason. It's just amazing. It's the most sparse album of her first four, I would say. And despite that, it's just really stunning. It takes a very minimalist approach, focusing a lot more on Björk's voice and smaller, more subdued production moments, joined with some amazing electronic elements. That, despite the sort of smaller, more intimate style, it ends up making it sound massive at the same time, which is crazy. The overall sound of this record is just to die for, and the performances are incredible. Some of Björk's best written songs to date. Hidden Place is an amazing opener. I love Cocoon. It's Not to You. It's one of the most beautiful songs just ever. I love the way that the beat switches in the middle of the chorus, which is in the middle of the title of the song. Just delightful. I think Unison is a brilliant closer. And the only issue is I do think that it runs ever so slightly too long. And Heirloom doesn't quite hit the same peaks as the rest of the albums for me. Pluto I dislike. This one I think is just good. Despite that, I think it's a truly just amazing record. I have it a very high 4.5 stars. I absolutely love it. And if I were to remake or go back through and edit some things, there's a very solid chance it lands in my top 100 records.
Mhm.
I forgot that at the time because it's not on my radio music right now, but very strong chance of that. And maybe even Post could have gotten in there. But yeah, Vespertine, clear number
Yes.
one for me. So yeah,
Perfect.
Bjork's pretty good, huh? She's
Oh,
made some
you
interesting
can't
stuff.
tell. You can't tell. I'm a bit of a fan.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought that those were ironic in the background.
Oh, this is a green screen.
Ah, nice, nice.
So
Uh,
what else is there to say? Honestly, is like to me, the like I said before, a debut can go higher. The 7 through 4 counts for me. They swap a lot, but right now, Vespertine, Homogenic, Post, they're my mainstays. Those can be in my top 100. They can be maybe even my top 75 at points. Yeah. And
yeah,
I've
yeah,
only been listening to her for like what, since October. She's had an impact for me in terms of pop.
absolutely. There's just so much to unpack within this relatively short discography compared to just some of the legends out there. And I mean, only 10 records is nothing, but there's just so much stylistic ground and diversity within her catalog to be found. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Her voice is definitely the thing that stood out to me the most. I always knew that I enjoyed her as a vocalist, just songs that I knew, but I didn't realize how great I thought that she was. She really does help to lift the arrangements in ways that I think not every singer does necessarily. And I think that
No.
it really helps her out, especially on even a record like Utopia, which I didn't like. I still think that she sounds great on it. So that being said, though, that was
Mhm.
the Bjork discussion. Any closing thoughts, closing remarks? Or
No, I say listen to more Bjork, and that's it.
probably, I should probably look into the Sugar Cubes at some point. Haven't heard any of that
Yeah,
stuff yet, so
they're good. They're a pretty good
yes,
band.
I gotta take the proper deep dive into Bjork stuff. I'll listen to her self-titled.
I wouldn't go. I wouldn't listen to that. I no.
Take your word for it. Well, that being said, I really hope that you enjoyed the discussion on Bjork. 10 records, 9 of them are very good. So, that being said, I hope that you check in the description for a link to the Discord server and as well just sort of give your opinions on Bjork. Plenty to discuss here, plenty to talk about. And with that being said, I really hope that you enjoyed the discussion and feel free to check out more content or just leave. Your choice. You have a great one. Bye.